Dzień dobry Państwu.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another debate. It will be partly on site and partly online. So on site we have Christian Kratiuk from PCH24, editor-in-chief, and online we have Tomasz Terlikowski, the political journalist, and Marcin Kędzierski from Jagiellonian Club. So we can hear each other and see each other. Welcome. Let me start this discussion from the simplest thing, which is the question that was asked. Will Poland follow the Spanish path? The Spanish path describes the situation when some time ago, by the 60s or 70s, the Catholic society during 2 generations has changed dramatically. Catholics stopped to be, in statistical sense, but also in political and cultural sense, to dominate the Spanish way of living. The legislation has been revamped totally, and that revamped changed such fundamental issues like the right to abortion, single-sex marriages, and relationship between a church and society. And the question remains, will Poland follow in the same direction, or maybe in 50 or 60 years it will appear that Catholics are just a margin, that they are minority, and that our Polish society resembles the Spanish society. So something which was the source of pride for many Poles, it's being individual, that will be lost. So let me start. I don't know who will go first. Maybe it will be easier to start from Christian Kratiuk being with me here, but maybe I will refer to Dr. Kędzierski to respond. Will Poland follow the Spanish path, understood as I described it? First and foremost, thank you for having me today. At the beginning, I wanted to start with the definition of the so-called Spanish way. Because very often we know that this is due to engagement of political environments who respond to these secularist movements. So when we analyze the views of Poles in 2021, the Polish society is less conservative than in 2015. So the church and the position of the church and the position of the government is translated into a higher level of secularism in Poland. But with reference to the crisis of Christianity, I know that Christianity has different elements that make up its essence, but I think that the most important message delivered by Jesus Christ, it was to redefine the power, to resign from domination and opt for service. The Saint Paul wrote that the kings had to undermine Jesus Christ's teaching because he undermined the power. And from this perspective, when I take a look at Christianity and the crisis of it, I would like to point out 3 main institutions present in Christianity that are in deep crisis today. And this crisis is related to this bad or not appropriate understanding of power. This is school, church, and family. Pope Francis said that this is the crisis of clergy, so misunderstanding of power in church, of the rules according to which the church is functioning. We have pedophilia scandals that shake the foundations of church all around the world. So church is not capable of exercising power anymore. That's why it's got into trouble. All that is translated into the number of vocations. So if somebody wants to become a priest now, they need a real kamikaze approach because it's not any kind of prestige anymore. The second source of crisis, this is school, the paternalistic model where pupil is just a recipient of knowledge and teacher delivers that knowledge. It's not possible to keep up this model for so long, and it's very difficult to find right candidates for teachers. So school will stop existing soon due to shortages of staff. And the third institution, the family, which is also in deep crisis, and here due to patriarchalism and the traditional model of family, with the roaring emancipation of women, the standard and the traditional family can be maintained. And the new model is not compliant with the gospel. To me, emancipation, women emancipation, is a reference to equality. We have some understanding of power as man domination over women. So because of this patriarchalism and this crisis of clergy and crisis of school, that causes all troubles. But there is still a chance to redefine the three areas and to try to shed some light on this gospel and lead this gospel to the new world. The Jesus Christ message is quite universal. And I think it also refers to these three areas of crisis. Thank you very much. My comment is with regard to the gospel-related matters in the 13th chapter of a letter to to Romans. St. Paul's is in favor of power, so he approves of the death penalty. When it comes to relationship with regard to patriarchalism, there is also a question how we are going to understand that. But there are many parts of gospel defining the relationship between a man and a father. Then the father is the leader. In the letter to Ephesians, we can talk about the ultimate father. So I would be quite cautious with this understanding that after 21 centuries we got to the real meaning of gospel. And Tomasz Terlikowski, about your understanding of the Spanish way. Maybe I will repeat some issues, and I will repeat what was said by Mr. Kędzierski, but however, I couldn't hear part of his take. Starting from historical perspective, Poland will not follow in the steps of Spain because the history of the two countries is totally different. By the 60s, Spain was a Catholic. By the 18th century, Spain was a Catholic country, but after that it was in deep division. It was a strong country with strong groups of Masons, with anti-clergy movements and anarchia, and in the 19th century the Catholic Church was weaker than anti-clergy movements. Then we had a durable and deep civil war where church was victim very often. It was not it was of course managed and fought by Spain on both sides, and that causes how deep was the division in Spain at the time. And General Franco rule didn't change it. Of course, Catholicism as a national religion was imposed in a way, but in Poland, we didn't have this element. We didn't have such strong anti-clergy movement or anarchist movement. We didn't have such a civil war and slaughter of clergy. But we also didn't have any religious country, religious state, and Spain had such something like that. The officials had to had to justify their absence during the Sunday Mass, and the prisoners had to confess once a month. So Poland cannot follow in the steps of Spain for sure. And the question is, how do we define this Spanish way? The Spanish way, to me, it's a Zapatero-like path. So it's not only about becoming a secular state in a less or more dynamic way, but we can see the whole. We can see the Western countries, all the Western European countries. But if we talk about the Spanish path, this is a strong anti-clergy reaction and objection against church. And I think that at this stage, Poland will not follow in this direction. The Polish religious apatheism and secularization will, to some extent, aggressive or even brutal, but it will be deepening the lack of any reaction to what's going on within the church, to responses delivered by church in the public debates and responses delivered by church in life situations. So it will be just indifference. And this is a challenge ahead of Poland. It will not be aggressive in the Spanish style. The anti-clergy or atheistic movement will not be aggressive in any way. It will be just indifference. Let me point out even sex scandals revealed and disclosed, and bishops, we have tens of bishops penalized. First of them, they stirred some emotions. With the 10th of them, TV channels, they do not send their teams to broadcast it. Nobody is interested. It doesn't stem from the fact that media is not interested in general. They know that people are not interested in that, and they will not attract the audience. And why? Because this part that could get excited about it, and the part that gets excited about it, so this anti-clergy part of Catholics, they are mostly indifferent when it comes to this. So they don't think it's a problem. It is perceived as a problem by people who do not believe at all, by atheists. And this is our path. I think that we will set off this journey, on this journey of indifference and fight against church. But I have no doubts that this problem will go deeper and that it will touch voters of the leftist parties and we will see whether it will affect the voters of conservative parties as well. And I don't want to say that we will find ourselves in the shoes of Spain, but the secularization will follow, and it will become deeper and deeper. And overcoming this trend, which is the seen everywhere in the civilization, it's hard work for tens of years, for decades, and it is related to definition of the new model of Catholicism. We live in post-Trident times, which, due to many social changes, and as Dr. Kędzierski said, it's also related to emancipation of women and many other reasons which are also related to understanding of being religious and different understanding of some theses and some arguments. So this formula has been exhausted, and we live in the times which are analogical to the Reformist time. And it will take decades to develop a new model and potential, and not necessary, of course, because it is not determined. The secularism doesn't have to be fought by Catholicism. We don't know about it, but if we want to fight it, it will take long decades, not months or years. Thank you very much. I understand this Spanish path as something really symbolic, from a path from Catholic society that followed some Catholic rules and principles to radically secular society. Of course, in case of Spain, this radicalism is quite important. But for example, when we take Ireland, we do not observe any Zapateroism there. But when we analyze Ireland without any political connotations, because indeed the history of Poland and Ireland is closer than in case of Poland and Spain, because Ireland has no civil war. It was under the British rule for many years. It gained its independence more or less in the same period as Poland did. They were not affected by communism or the Second World War, but the link between the society and church was quite vivid and quite strong. So that's why these are two symbolic countries. Two comments on what Tomasz Telikowski said. How do I understand and what is the main threat? I agree that this is this indifference, total indifference and lack of reaction. I don't know how to combine it with and how to merge it and link it to the attacks on churches, some attacks on priests, and some other examples being an evidence that it's not any indifference, but this is engagement. But comparison to the era of reformatists and post-reformatists and great religious disputes. So what is the relation between the two and this indifference that you mentioned? So firstly, we have been talking to those who are with us online, and now time for our panelists on site. Thank you very much. I find very interesting what you're saying. You said that it's not determined anymore. This Mr. Telikowski said that it is not determined yet. So Tomasz stressed that it might be the case, but it doesn't have to be the case, if I understood it correctly. And I do not believe in any historical determinism and any analogies or lack of analogies with Spain and Ireland. Of course, it says something, but as Tomasz Telikowski said, that might be the case, that the radicalism that we could observe on the streets of Poland, that it will become interesting for general public, fueled by international organizations and media. The logo of this conference speaks for itself. We have the cultural fight in the EU, and we have a Poland that is cracked in half. Of course, logo doesn't have to be interpreted by the organizers the same manner as by the guests, but there is something in that the international institutions, Poland is even more divided. So maybe we got come as Catholic Church, as society, and we could see that, okay, so it's dying slowly. It will be enough for us, for church, for our generation. There will be enough Christians, but we don't know what's about next generations. But I think that we shouldn't sit idle. The Spanish path, not only in the Polish streets, but also in the European Parliament, in the European Union, they may win because we live in the world governed by emotions, and media stir a lot of emotions. And we know that very often minorities become very powerful because of their emotional engagement. So when Tomasz Tolikowski said about counter-reformist movements, I find it really positive. So to respond to these questions, whether Poland will follow the Spanish path? Of course, we don't know. It will depend on our audience and on all people interested and on the general public and all polls. So this counter-reformist movement may become our share, because it doesn't have to be so that it will die. It doesn't have to be that people will become indifferent. It can go in the opposite direction. I know that it's not realistic now if we analyze the social engagement of Catholics. However, media patrons, we have several dozens of them, and they're interested in the topic. Maybe this conference will start some kind of reflection. Maybe with God's help, we will become an important player for the European Union, according to what John Paul II expected. Because we were supposed to spread Christianity all around Europe. I would say a few words about the crisis of state and church. The state has to know why it exists. If we as Poles were to define that Poland exists on the map, not only in order to be there, to be a member of the European Union, not only to be the leader in fulfillment of sustainable growth goals, which sometimes are contrary to what we used to. If we stop being a leader of the new Green Deal, and if we stop being the best in fulfillment of the assumptions of the European Agenda 2030, if we set a goal for Poland to become independent for some purpose, not only to foster Polish language, but also to make the Christian civilization survive, we might become the role model for the world. And the fact that we live at the times of the reform and post-reformist times that may become true. You've mentioned two things, both of you, that this crisis of Christianity is not anything bad because it's just a living post-Trident model, and this is like going back to real gospel, if I understood correctly. Mr. Tarlikowski and Kędzierski, this is the sense of the message I got. What do you think about this? Maybe we talking about the collapse of civilization and crisis. Maybe we err. Maybe we will see the world flourish. Here we can discuss it on sociological level and analyze whether it will be a spring for the Polish Church or not. This is the time of enrollment to Christian universities, to become to seminars. But no, let's reverse that. Let's take abortion. For example, in Spain, they had this solution. In Ireland, the nation was in favor of abortion. So, and we stopped this historical determinism that was imposed on us. A year ago, a year and a week ago, on the 22nd of October, Poland, with its institutions, a bit too late, Poland managed to save thousands of lives. And Poland was capable of doing it. We defended this Catholic imaginary. And that was something that was broader than Catholic rules. With Polish institutions were able to stand up and to say no to abortion, which is perceived as something really good for the West by the Western countries, and nobody demolished Poland, nobody destroyed us. Of course, they will take some money away, they will reprimand us in the European Parliament, they will issue some resolutions, but we are standing tall, and we gave this example. The governor of Texas signing the Heartbeat Act, he referred to the example of Poland. And now we can hear about another governor who said that he wants to reverse this abortionist trend. The Spanish way is not any necessity for Poland. And maybe Poland will spark this fire. The only thing we have to do, we have to wish for it. And now, Dr. Kędzierski, for sure you would like to comment on what was said. In October 2020, Poland reversed the trend. And it's a great example of not following the Spanish path. Can you hear us? Can you hear me?
Akurat. No to może skoro słyszysz, przepraszam, to może Tomku, to ty, gdybyś się odniósł do tego, co mówił Krystian Krawczyk, o co żeśmy mówili, a może później uda się...
So maybe Dr. Kędzierski will manage to join us later. Okay, now it's okay. So with regard to what was said, I've said that we have to go to the primary Christianity. No, I didn't say so. I just said that Christianity is shaped by the era in which it lives. So before the Reformist times, it got new shape by appointment of seminars and by some other steps that were taken, and by offering better education to clergy, by different Jesus orders, and so on and so forth, and any other assemblies. Now this impulse has been exhausted, and Christianity needs some new emanation. It doesn't mean we have to go back to the past, because 2,000 years have passed, and Christianity was combined with cultures. It introduced some different traditions of some philosophical cultures. It was developed, and we will not go back to the first Jewish, Christian, and then Greek communities. We need to listen. What is the pain of the world? What is the challenge? What is the question which is asked by people? And to respond to that according to in the Christian spirit. But also we have to open ourselves to what's new, not only focus on the past. Of course, it is not so that politically it is not possible to be successful. The ruling of the Constitutional Court was one example, but we have to remember that firstly, this decision was not supported by the state nor by institutions pro-life, with no promotional campaign. This decision rather reversed the sociological trend than restored. Of course, we defend life, but at the same time we promised that with words of politicians who are supposed to be role models, that families that will have children with disabilities will get greater support and care, and they will give additional money. We promise that the women and their partners, fathers, who learn that their children are terminally ill, or they will ill during pregnancy, they will get an access to free of charge professional state-funded support. And it's a year and a week. And let me ask you, what about this support? The Christianity is about protecting life, but it's not only about protecting life at its earliest stage. Instead of that, we got additional grassroots bill to make this abortion law even stricter. That will just hit the debate. And it will be preceded with analogical bill, which is prepared by pro-abortionist movements. But let's remember that the legal basis was prepared by environments who were neglected and rejected by conservatives, because this ruling wouldn't be issued if it hadn't been for the great ruling of 1997, which offers the full argumentation, and this was issued by the tribunal under Andrzej Sol as supervisor. And then there was a legal consensus among lawyers. Professor Safian stated similar things, and Andrzej Rzepliński as well. But as a result of actions taken by conservative right, which has a deep social policy supporting families, multi-children families, but the policy, the judicial reform, and caused by the legal consensus that brought together lawyers, it collapsed. And this ruling, which was very important and very needed, if it was accepted by any other tribunal, it would take much more time. And now if the left win elections, I don't know if it happens, but ultimately they will win. Because the right will not govern Poland forever. So some decisions will be taken in no time. Also because this continuity of tribunal was interrupted. So instead of waiting with some decisions and knowing that judges nominated by us, they will survive the next term, these changes were implemented in a way that they might not survive. So we have to be aware that this image is much more complex, and that it's not like that the protection of conceived life is the only emanation of Christianity. If we want to talk about the full protection of life, we have to think what is the offer, the state offer for persons with children with the Down syndrome who are afraid that their children will be left alone after their death. It's a blatant problem of many parents of children with some mental disability. What will be the response of the country which is proud of its Christianity? This is the fundamental question, and I'm for, and I'm totally for protection of life, but we cannot leave it like it is and leave the problem to parents. Because of course we implemented a law which was important and it was needed, but it's not enough. It shouldn't be the last word on the side of the state, and the church is engaged. So I have to confirm, but in social life nothing changes.
Czy słyszy?
Can Dr. Kędzierski hear us? Can you hear us? Can you hear me? Right, yes. I was asking you before to take the floor, but you didn't hear us, so now it's your chance to join the discussion. Unfortunately, I didn't hear Mr. Terlikowski in the first or second instance, so I have to comment on what gentleman said in the studio. I would say that we pay too much attention to abortion as Christians in this context. It's not that it's not important, because it's fundamentally important, but I would not like Christianity to be boiled down to the issue of abortion, which sometimes seems to be the case. Because it seems to be boiling down to protecting unborn children, while we do not care anymore so much for the already born, and parents have to ask for any kind of support for their children. I think that I see a certain hope for the Church in Pope Francis, and I would not focus on the national level so much. Of course, the nation is important for the development of Christianity, among others, but what's more important for me is the Christian culture rather than the Christian politics. Because I have no doubts that after a change of guard in the government, we will be witnesses to very fast changes in the abortion law, going towards significant liberalization, which is visible also among the public opinion. What's more important, in my opinion, is a foundational work on the culture, so that the culture, in the perspective of 20 to 30 years, for the Polish society to be Catholic, and that it does not have to introduce a stricter abortion law through the back door, and rather in the normal procedure, or even a referendum where most Poles will vote for a stricter abortion regulation. I mentioned the church, the school, and the family as three institutions, because these are the three formational spaces where in the long term a Christian culture can be built as a foundation of politics, because there is no Christian politics without Christian culture, which is obvious in the Western countries where the tendency is very, very visible because there is no Christian culture at the foundation of politics. So the question is whether there can be a Christian culture without Christian politics, because this could be put this way, the other way around, that is. And one might come to the conclusion that due to changes in politics there might be no room for Christian culture. But it seems to me that we all agree that it was a good thing to strengthen the protection of unborn life. There seems to be no issue on that point. There might be some more discussion regarding what might happen in the future, because I am not so deeply convinced that the right or left will win the next election, the liberal left, because that might not be the case at all. And then, but nobody said it was going to be the next election, right? Maybe not the next, maybe the following, we will see. Who knows? We've seen examples of very long continued government of Christian Democrats, right-wing, that lasted for years. And from this point of view, we might say that the legal change will be bolstered and it will survive. Let me comment on what my four speakers said. Ladies and gentlemen, it's obvious that we are for all kinds of life. I think there is no need to convince anybody in this room that there is need to support life in all dimensions. If anybody is in a dramatic situation, the dramatic situation of parents of children with the Down syndrome, that's obvious and I fully agree. But this issue was not the spark, the symbol that the ban became. I agree with Tomasz Terlikowski that it would have been better to be done by the fully supported, non-undermined constitutional tribunal. But that wouldn't have much importance for the world or for the children that were saved thanks to this, worldwide. Worldwide, it would not be recognized so much. In any case, so this is not a panel about Pope Francis, about modernism. It is about Poland and whether it is going to follow the Spanish way as a society. Currently, after the a few years of right-wing government in Poland, in the context of abortion, what's going on, the reactions are contrary to what we'd expect as Catholics. I recommend Marek Jurek's commentary of this. He's a practitioner, and he says that if we had banned abortion 5 years ago, when it was realistically possible for the first time in 2016, the polls might be different. These women's strikes would not be as strong as they are now, because things would have been stunted back then. We want the Catholic society to prevail. If so, we need to protect in some kind the state. I'm not talking about some symbiosis or pathological relationship between the state and the church. It's about respecting the constitution if we're talking about the marriage as being a relationship of man and woman. And this is our Christian basic rule. We want our children not to be taught that man plus man is exactly the same as man plus man and woman as family. We want our children to have the right to innocence and childhood. This can be provided and protected by the state, but in our civilization, circle can only be based on Christian values or the idea of protecting these values. Today in Europe, or rather worldwide, as Poles should be protected by worldwide left if they could be trusted in any way, if they were honest. But let's imagine an honest left that takes under protection minorities like Native Americans are under protection, or Aborigines in Australia. Then we should be protected. We are the last Mohawks, of the Christian culture, the minority under strain that say that children should not be killed, that children should be protected, etc. And there's huge capital who come and want to destroy that, like the invaders, like those hated invaders in those movies about Native Americans. We are the Pocahontas whose home has been invaded, and we should be protected. Right, the last Mohawks. I don't want to be Pocahontas. I'd rather be the last Mohawk. Thank you very much in any case. Thank you, Dr. Kędzierski, Tomasz Terlikowski, Krystian Kratiuk. Thank you very much